Hi, everyone. Welcome to Career Conversations. I'm Meera Jogasundram. Our guest today, Jess Rasool, is an executive coach based in London, UK. His recent overarching activity has been centered on getting executive coaches and mentors fluent and prepared enough for integrating artificial intelligence into their practice and development for 2024 and the next 5, 10, and 30-year horizons. In 2024, Jess will be speaking at major national and international events on strategic deployment of AI coaching in organizations to facilitate decision making at board levels within businesses. Hi, Jess.
Hi, Mira. Thanks for having me on today.
Thank you for making time for this session. How are you feeling today?
I'm excited. I don't often get to share my life story. I'm always either teaching or writing things, and sometimes I lose track of how far I've actually come in the years I've been on this planet.
We are excited to know that side of you as well. Viewers, if you would like to ask a question, comment on something that Jess has to say, please feel free to put in your comments in the comment section attached to this post. I'll flash them on the screen and Jess will kindly respond to them. Right, Jess?
Absolutely.
Okay, Jess. Tell us about your career journey.
Well, I'll start with what I'm doing currently, which is I'm very much centered on looking at how artificial intelligence is something that can help human beings, and specifically in the area of coaching. And it's because ever since I was first starting to study in my life, I've always been interested in the mind. I've always been interested in consciousness. And it came from probably when I first saw the movie Star Wars. And I saw Luke Skywalker and Obi-Wan Kenobi and Yoda and all the Jedi using their mind to do things with the forces of the universe. And I thought, I want to be like them, you know. So I got very interested in science, in physics, and understanding the forces of the universe. I thought, okay, if I'm going to become a Jedi, I better understand the forces of the universe. So through physics, I understood things like gravity, electricity, magnetism, all these kind of things. But then I had to understand the other side of it too, which was how the mind kind of linked into those forces. So I spent a lot of time trying to understand how the brain works, but not just the brain, more specifically the mind. So not just from Western psychological models, but also how the mind has been understood historically through things like mindfulness and meditation and Eastern traditions, like from India and from China, those kind of indigenous traditions as well, from Aboriginal and Native American traditions as well, shamanistic traditions. So I wanted to know everything I could about the mind. And when you join those two things together, you end up with an interesting mix of a scientist and somebody who's a bit of a mystic. I was terrible at school. I got bullied a lot. And as a result, I didn't stay in school very much. But then at a certain point, I made the decision that if I didn't study, I was going to stay stuck in a place in life where I wasn't really learning much or able to make much of a difference in the world. So I put my head down and I went from the lowest classes in my school in terms of level of intelligence to the highest ones. But interestingly, it all changed when I was in an English class once. And part of the English class is you're supposed to do a little portfolio project, write poems and essays and things like that. And I wrote this poem about a starship. I was about 14 years old at the time. And my English teacher said, you shouldn't be in this class. And she said, you need to be in the top class. And I was in the lowest class. So there's about 3 levels, and I was in level 3, and I should have been in level 1, she said. So she spoke to the head of English in our school, and she said, he needs to be in your class because the level of his English and the way he articulates. So it gave me a different kind of confidence. And I thought, oh, okay. And a very similar thing happened not so long after that with my maths teacher too. They realized my ability in maths was way better than they previously thought. And they moved me up to the top maths class. And the following year, they gave me a maths award saying, this is a person whose maths has improved the most in the whole school. And I was only about 16 years old then. And this is around the time I was also starting to play with computers, because I was being bullied a lot in the school playground. And to avoid the bullies, I used to go inside to this room that belonged to the maths department, and they had computers in there. And they allowed the students to use the computers. And I went in and I used to use the computers for playing games and things. But then eventually my maths teacher showed me how I could write computer programs. And I remember my first computer program that I wrote. It was a random insult generator. So it would take a verb, it would take a noun and something else like that. And then it would use random numbers to create a phrase and put them out. And I could use these phrases and I could call my bullies names. It was my way of getting back at them. But funnily enough, anybody who knows anything about artificial intelligence, especially things like ChatGPT and other things like that, they'll know that actually that's more or less the underlying structure of most modern AIs. It involves having a database of words, having algorithms which mix them up, and then pump out phrases. That's exactly what goes on. And I wrote this code when I was 14 years old. Wow. It was only like 12 lines of code, all right? But it created great insults that I could use. And at the time, I remember reading a book on programming. I came across this program you could use to create a chatbot. Now, bear in mind, this is when I was 14 years old. This is 1980. And I was programming amazing. A computer with a chatbot.
That's amazing, Jess. Really amazing.
So anybody who knows anything about AI will know that one of the most famous chatbots there is the one that was created in the 1960s. And it was a chatbot called Eliza. And it was meant to simulate a psychotherapist, a Rogerian psychotherapist. And you'd ask it questions and it would feed back to you and it would paraphrase some of the things you're saying. And I remember that the person who created it, as professor, he asked his secretary to test it out. And at one point he went back to her and she told him to leave the room because she was having a private conversation. Now, this chatbot, compared to my one that was just 12 lines of code, I think it was about 600 or 700 lines of code. It's much more sophisticated, a lot more words and language in there. The algorithms were a bit more, sophisticated. But it gave the impression that you were genuinely talking to somebody, And it's interesting that was about 600 lines of code. And I put the code in myself and wrote it and adjusted it and so on. And again, this is when I was 14 years old, 1980. But the same structure for that program is essentially the same structure that we see in modern AIs like ChatGPT. And I find it amusing because people are wowed by things like ChatGPT. And I was playing with that stuff like when I was 14 years old and thinking, wow, this is cool. And I just copied it out of a book, on a really ancient computer in those days. It was a Commodore PET. And then you could also put it into a BBC microcomputer as well, which was very modern in those days. But now you need computers that have hundreds of thousands of graphics GPU cards to be able to run the AI processing. It's incredibly complex and sophisticated, but really it's just a more powerful version of what I was working with back in 1980, which is 44 years ago. It's exactly the same thing, just with bigger, fancier computers and fancier code and more data. That's it. Nothing's really changed. So that led me very much to get interested in computers and programming. And when I left school, I told my careers advisor, because of the whole thing to do with Luke Skywalker and Jedi Knights and the galaxy, I said I wanted to be an astronaut. And he laughed at me and he said, no, because he knew my history about not going to school and missing classes. And even though I got better, he said, you've missed so much, you're not going to get the grades that you need to go to university. And I was really annoyed, but I knew I was good with computers. So I applied for a diploma course in the county where I live now, and in Hertfordshire, University of Hertfordshire. They have the Harry Potter studios just up the road from us, Warner Brothers Studios. So the Harry Potter experience here as well, which is good. But I went and studied IT. Believe it or not, in 1986, there was this brand new discipline that was being taught at universities and colleges. And when I first applied, I was actually going to apply for mechanical and aeronautical engineering, because I thought that would be my route to working in aerospace and aeroplanes and astronautics and rockets and things like that. But instead, I heard about this new thing called information technology, IT, as many people would know it today. And I thought, oh, that looks interesting. That's a good mix of computer programming and engineering and business, all these things together. So instead of doing the mechanical and aeronautical engineering route, I decided to do that instead. And I got to admit, it was a lot of fun. I learned a lot. I wrote programs to control robots and did programs that played games, all sorts of things, and controlled machines. But I can't help thinking as I was finishing it, I kind of really want to go back to wanting to be an astronaut. And in 1 year, I did spend working for British Nuclear Fuels. I was designing layout of monitors that monitor radioactivity levels at one of the major nuclear power plants here in the UK. And when I was doing that, I thought, this is so my thing. This is what I always wanted to do. Work with computers, work with science and nuclear power, all this kind of stuff. But it still didn't appeal to my heart. And I thought, I'm going to apply again to go to university, but this time I want to go and I want to study astrophysics. I want to get back to that route of becoming an astronaut. And I was lucky. I got into Queen Mary College in the University of London, and I began my astrophysics degree there. And if anybody knows anything about science, they'll know that astrophysics is probably the hardest science there is, because of the mathematics involved, the concepts involved. You're talking about Einstein's theory of relativity, thermonuclear physics, quantum physics, all this kind of stuff. And the maths is so hard. It really is to understand all these things. But I managed to get through my 3 years. I graduated. But just before I left, I was reading up a lot about astronauts who'd been in space, and they'd come back and they'd gone through some shift in consciousness. They've gone to experience this thing called the overview effect, where they've seen the planet from above and they've just gone through a shift in how they related to it. And it wasn't just because of the great view. And I wondered whether it had something to do with the low gravity environment, whether that affected the way their brains were functioning. So I thought, you know what? I'm not really interested so much in outer space. I'm becoming more interested in inner space and what was going on inside their minds, especially in relationship to gravity. So instead of going off and following a program which would have taken me down the route of astronaut training with NASA and people like that, I went and did a master's degree in molecular biology and drugs research. And it was at Birkbeck College in London. So they're both colleges at the University of London. And I did my master's degree there. And there we learned how to use computers to model reality. So model how drugs work at molecular scales, model genetics, genetic engineering, and also generally learn how to work with mathematics and physics and create simulations of reality of the world. And it was through that I'd just been finishing doing that when the place I was working in for my evening job, bar that I was working in, someone came in and we got talking, and this person was really interested in the mind and consciousness, and she became my partner a little while later, but she got me really interested in consciousness all over again. And I started to look into consciousness, not just from the point of view of science, but I also started looking into it historically and culturally, looking at how consciousness is understood by Tibetan monks, how it's understood by yoga masters and Shaolin monks from China and Native Americans and Aborigines and African shaman traditions, all sorts of things. But I knew I wanted to somehow link that back with the science, how the brain works. And this is where I started feeling a bit like Obi-Wan Kenobi, or Luke Skywalker, because I was taking something that was almost religious, mystical understanding of consciousness, but I was still trying to understand it from a scientific perspective and technology perspective as well. And it was around this time that I thought, I want to actually get some direct experience of this stuff. I don't just want to be reading about it in books. So I started training in martial arts. I started training in Chinese medicine and, complementary medicine, and learned about how people work with their mind and their body from different traditions. I learned about energy from a different perspective, from an Eastern perspective rather than a scientific perspective. And the person I met around that time, she was my partner at that time. She was an executive coach. And she saw what I was doing and she said, that's something that could really be useful in coaching, in helping people manage their energy and not burn out, and manage their way that they learn things, for example, and go through change, which is a big thing in organizational change and so on. And she said, it'd be really good if you could somehow convert that wisdom tradition from China, from India and others, convert that so it would integrate with Western psychologies. And that's one of the things I noticed about therapy and coaching at the time. It was very much based on Western psychologies and models, and didn't really use any kind of wisdom traditions from other cultures. And I thought there's something wrong about that. There really needs to be, for example, a psychometric personality test. They're all based on Western models of psychology. And I thought we need to have a psychometric which includes wisdom traditions from other cultures. So I actually wrote my own psychometric on paper, and I got people to score themselves, and I'd add up the scores manually and then guide them on how they should work with their energy and work with how they were learning things. And then I put it into an Excel spreadsheet. This was back in 2008. And then I made that code through data science and machine learning a bit more sophisticated. I started including charts and visuals and graphics. And eventually I put it onto a website. And then I started putting in the kind of code that's linked with machine learning, the underlying process for artificial intelligence. And this was in 2008.
You're way ahead, Jess. You're way ahead.
So in 2008, I put together an AI coaching platform. And people would answer a questionnaire. The AI would look at the scores, and then it would recommend to them what was the best priority for them to go and pay attention to in order to make the best use of their energy for that day. But then some of the people I was working with, they said, it'd be really good if we can meet up with other people who have learned to do this. And it'd be great if you could perhaps match us to them. So I put in some additional algorithms which would match that person's state of mind with the other clients that I had. And for those people who agreed to be visible to each other, they joined the same group. And when they did their profiles, they could see everybody else in the group whose state of mind was similar to their own. And those people would support each other. They'd have each other's back. But unfortunately, they had the same strengths and they had the same weaknesses. And that way they were similar. But because they had the same weaknesses, they couldn't learn from each other. They could reinforce one another's weaknesses, which wasn't good. So they were great to like, but not great to learn with. And then I said, all right, well, maybe people need someone who's completely opposite as well. Someone who's got strengths where they've got weaknesses. And they would be able to challenge and stretch that person and be a kind of devil's advocate for them. And then I realized there was a third person needed as well, which was someone who's going to mediate between the two, between supporting them and challenging them.
Yeah.
And they would help that person with reflection. So it turns out that everybody in the world, if they want to grow, if they want to develop themselves, even if they're an organization and it wants to grow, they need three things every day. They need support, they need challenge, and they need reflection. And it turns out your best friends are the ones that give you those things. They know how to support you. They know how to push your buttons and be opposite to you too sometimes and challenge you. But they also can be great sounding boards for reflection too. And the ones that have all three qualities tend to be your best friends, right? Or you end up marrying them, or you start running a business with them, you know. So I call these three things, support, challenge, and reflection. They're just like vitamins, because you can get a vitamin like vitamin C, and if you don't get it for a day or two, it's not a problem. But if you don't have it for a month or two, then it can cause scurvy. It can cause all sorts of problems for you. And it turned out that support, challenge, and reflection were exactly like that. If you don't get support for a day, if it's not critical, it doesn't really matter. If you've not had support for a month or two while you're at work or from people around you, that's going to affect you. Similarly, if no one's challenged you at work, no one's stretched you, then again, you're not really going to be able to grow. And lastly, if you've never stopped to pause and take stock of your situation and spend some time in reflection, you get to your mid-40s and you look around and you wonder how on earth you got there. You end up with a midlife crisis because you failed to reflect for a long time. So it turns out in coaching, everybody needs support, challenge, and reflection each day. And a coach's job, I discovered, was helping people to find their vitamins for the day. You know, how do they need to be supported that day? Where do they need to be stretched and get challenged themselves? And what is it they need to reflect on? But in plain English, it came down to me saying to them, look, what is it you need more of? What is it you need less of? And what is it that you need to not interfere with? And because you just need to leave it alone. It's not broken, doesn't need fixing, right? And when you answer those questions each morning and attend to the answers, you actually end up making the best of your energy for the day. And it starts to align to one of the most fundamental laws in the universe, which is the law of conservation of energy. It turns out in nature, whatever respects the law of conservation of energy, it tends to be sustainable. And if you're not respecting the law of conservation, it's simple. That thing becomes unsustainable. And typically nature gets rid of it. It makes it extinct. All right. And business and organizational change and coaching for the last 7 or 8 years, that's what I've focused on. At the university, I was a research fellow, and I looked into how do we use technology to help people do more of the right things, less of the things that are not empowering and enabling, and also facilitate reflection and processing and understanding of things. And that took me very much into big projects to do with the European Union. Probably the most significant one was working at the base for the International Space Station in Italy. And there we were working with astronaut trainers to design holographic headsets, which were going to help in the ground training of the astronauts, improve their performance. And we used AI because we measured heart rate variability, skin resistance, temperature, and we used that to kind of determine the emotional state of the person who's being trained and whether or not they were in the right emotional state for the work that they were doing. But the beauty of it is that part of that was helping training for the International Space Station. But next door in this other big hangar, we had a huge simulation of the Martian landscape. And this is where we were training future astronauts for a future manned Mars rover mission. So it's a Mars rover there, and it's designed for 6 people to sit in it and drive in it. And we were designing training for that. And you're surrounded by all this Martian terrain, and you're wearing these matrix-like holographic headsets where you can literally download a program into the headset and things will appear in holograms in front of you and instructing you which buttons to push, which nuts to unbolt, all this kind of stuff. And it's really out of this world stuff. And I finished, that was one of my last bigger projects. And the results of that were presented in Washington in 2019. And I believe from what the person who was the astronaut trainer we were working with, who presented the results for us, I think just after she had presented her results about the work that we were doing with NASA and ESA and this Martian mission and space station mission, I recall, I think it was Jeff Bezos came up on the stage afterwards talking about his space missions. And I remember leaving university last year and thinking, okay, how do I follow that? So I knew I was really still interested in technology and learning and coaching and helping people with their performance and their potential and so on. And I'd been coaching executives for the best part of 30 years up to this point, but I'd got no qualification to show for it. I was training other ICF accredited coaches, EMCCs, ACs, and I'm looking at them thinking, these are master certified coaches, but I'm training them. Yet I don't have a qualification of my own. And I trained enough coaches to realize that maybe I should just get a qualification and just see where that takes me. So for this last year, that's what I've been doing. I've been at Henley Business School on the Professional Certificate of Executive Education and been doing that. But then when that finished, I thought, right, I need to reach out into the community. And I started attending conferences from the EMCC, ICF, and Association of Coaching, amongst others. There were ethics conferences. There were AI hackathons at Henley Business School with Jonathan Passmore, amongst others. And then there were conferences with David Clutterbuck from the EMCC and others. And I began to realize I seem to be learning a lot from these people. And it'd been a long time since I learned stuff. From other people. I've been spending a lot of time teaching and getting other people's potential realized. And then I thought, this is my tribe, because I'm learning stuff, but also people are learning things from me, especially around artificial intelligence and coaching and the risks associated with that, but also the opportunities. So right now, that's what I'm spending a lot of my time doing. I'm presenting research papers in the next few months on new ways of testing how good AI coaching is compared to human beings, looking at also how do you use AI in ways that don't just involve language, where you're just talking through text, for example, on ChatGPT, but you can take the AI a bit further and get it to carry out actions for you as well and generate results. So we're already kind of doing that with things like Siri and Alexa, but how many of us would give full agency to an AI to do everything and carry out other actions too, like look after our bank account or maybe watch our children, and with coaches, it's a really important thing to consider, because coaches can talk, but can they help their clients to act? Can they help their clients to get results and attain goals? So these additional things are where I'm working at the moment. Most people might know that ChatGPT uses something called LLMs, which are large language models. That's what it's all about. It's all about language. But the next stage is about how do we convert that language into actions? And are AIs good enough? And how are they compared to human beings in helping clients turn what they're saying into actions? And lastly, are they able to not just help them carry out actions? Can they actually help them to achieve things, and generate impact? So the paper I'm presenting in a couple of months with the EMCC will be specifically looking at that. It'll say, all right, maybe we need some new tests to prove how good these AIs are. And all right, they can talk, but can they carry out actions? And are those actions in alignment with the impact that we were looking for? And most people who understand anything about AIs and use them will understand that AIs are pretty good at connecting with you and exchanging with you, but they're very limited in their agency to do things for you, like Alexa and Siri, things like that. You wouldn't ask Alexa to drive your car. You wouldn't ask Alexa to carry out surgery. You wouldn't ask Alexa to control a rocket to the moon. Okay, so we understand that these things have limitations, but in time, the hardware might change. And we might find ourselves in a situation where, especially with quantum computers, where the hardware can start to operate in the same way the human brain does. And at that point, it can start to have things like empathy. It can start to have things like self-awareness. And somebody put a really good question to me recently. This is where I just finish off on my monologue here. And they said, the main difference between current AIs and human beings is that human beings have independence. If a human being doesn't like something that they're being asked to do, they can say, no, I'm not going to do that. And they'll walk off. An AI doesn't have that independence. It can't just say, you know what, I'm not talking to you anymore. I'm going to switch off. All right, it doesn't do that. It can say, I refuse to answer that question because it might be illegal, or there might be constraints and guardrails around things like that. But it doesn't have its own free will. It doesn't have its own volition. And in the very near future, when people give AIs agency to do stuff, that's when things are really going to get questionable, especially for coaches who might allow AIs as a third party into their sessions, and where psychological safety and trust might come under question by doing that. So my concerns for the near future are about that. How do we bring in AI into coaching in a way that respects psychological safety, generates opportunities for insights, and it's all done in a way that's compliant also to emerging laws that are coming out, like the EU AI Act, for example. A lot of coaches are not ready for that. They're not ready for compliance being slapped on them before they've even had a chance to use the AI. But effectively, it's equivalent to GDPR. It will be required. And if you're using AI as part of your profession and you don't have the right frameworks and systems and compliance in place, you can be prosecuted. And it turns out, that the top 10, if I look at the top 11 risks of AI that EU AI highlighted, it turns out like 9 of them are directly applicable to what coaches have to work with their clients in sessions. So having said that, there are some people who look at AI and go, if you look at what somebody's doing, they're not necessarily going to first of all ask, is AI doing that for you? People don't really care on the street whether AI is doing something or not. They just are more concerned about whether their needs are being met. So they don't care if the engine behind a particular bit of software is AI, driven, or whether it's human driven. Until, of course, they find their own agency interrupted, and they're trying to do something, but the machine says no. All right, and there's no human in the loop, and then people will start feeling disempowered. So there is that risk. And I'm one of the people who's trying to get coaches to see this is not something you can talk about once a year in your next annual conference. This is happening now. And in the next 3 to 6 months, the rate that it's getting adopted in the world, if you're not keeping pace with that rate of change, you'll get left behind. And in terms of strategy, I've said to people, you can do one of two things. You can either partner with AI, or you can choose to carry on doing the things that you're doing without AI, and you will find yourself in competition with it. Or you'll find yourself in competition with someone who uses AI. So I'm really driving for us to use AI in an ethical kind of partnership. If we can do that, then it becomes more about collaboration rather than control. Many people think AI is going to take over the world and take control over everything. The reality is it can't do much without our permission. So if we collaborate with it, it's the genie's out of the box now. You can't control it. Anybody who thinks they can control this is very mistaken. All you can do is collaborate with it, So what I would suggest to people is learn to partner with it, learn to collaborate with it. and try and, get control wherever you can. But you'll find sometimes that the more sophisticated your collaboration is, the more sophisticated your partnership is, the more indistinguishable it will be from control anyway. So if you want control, you need to start building up very sophisticated partnerships, and not just with AIs, but with other human beings who are using AIs. And that will be your best defense against ever being controlled or replaced or anything like that. So partnership, collaboration is the key, not just with AIs, as I said, but also with each other as human beings. That way you'll secure a future which gives you opportunities rather than puts you at risk for doing things. So I can see myself for my career for the next year or two. I'm going to be starting a PhD hopefully soon in this particular kind of subject territory.
Congratulations.
But it'll be very much focused on looking at using AI from a place that is also interculturally respectful, because a lot of AI models are very Western biased and they don't have alignment as much to other cultures, like from India or China or things like that. ChatGPT in recent studies has certainly been shown to be very Western oriented, and it doesn't fit so well in terms of its responses for people from other cultures. So decolonializing AI and stop it being so Western oriented in everything it's doing is going to be important. And when other cultures get involved, we're going to see a decolonialization of AI. And that's important, I think. But the other thing that we'll probably see is, especially with AI coaching, you're going to see it becoming an online service. And it won't be governed as such by the traditional governing bodies of coaching. Because right now, most governing bodies don't have any competencies listed in their credentials that link to AI competencies. They're all linked to competencies to do with human beings exchanging things with each other. So it might go the way of the banks and finance, like it has with Bitcoin and cryptocurrency, where things become decentralized and everything goes onto the blockchain. And I was talking about some coaches with this recently, and the idea that your credentials, your experience as a coach, ultimately is going to get validated by some anonymous thing like a blockchain, like there is behind Bitcoin. They actually like the idea because there's a possibility that all that's being learned becomes shareable in an anonymized kind of way. So all coaches could benefit from all other coaches' experience, in which case the discipline of coaching is massively going to advance because it's not limited by the boundaries of any particular governing body, for example. So three major things are going to happen. We're already seeing democratization, where everybody's getting a chance to get access to coaching, providing they don't suffer from, data poverty, and they're not in a situation where they don't have the technology to access this, which we know is certainly the case in places like Africa and other countries. But we're seeing three things that will happen in the near future. The first has already started to happen: democratization of coaching through AI. The second thing that will happen is this thing that I just talked about, which is about decentralization, where there will not be a central governing body for coaching. There will be a central architecture for governing coaching on the internet, very similar to how Bitcoin and cryptocurrency is currently built over the internet, and uses something called trustless security. It's so secure because it's a peer-to-peer form of security that you don't need encryption and passwords and things like that. So that's the other thing. You'll see decentralization. And the result of those two things, because they'll be taken up globally, is you'll see the Western influence on AI-based coaching getting less and less, because more and more cultures are going to be putting into what's going on. And you're going to see a decolonialization of coaching. So those three things: democratization, decentralization, and decolonialization or decolonization. If I was to put my futurist hat on, which is what my job was for many years, working at university and making forecasts and looking at trends. If I look at the next 5 to 10 years, I see those three things happening. And it means the governing bodies, they're really going to have to reconsider their role in the future of coaching when things are going to be decentralized. And AI will make coaching democratized, and it's decolonialized. So the Western governing bodies don't have so much influence over exactly how coaching is credentialed and certified and how people are made compliant and so on, things like that. Those three things are massively going to change how coaching looks in the next 5 to 10 years. But the way AI is going, as I said, I wouldn't be surprised if people start seeing changes in the next 3 to 6 months of 2024. And I'm glad I'm in a career where I can attend to all of those things. I can be a coach and work with people. I can work with coaches in terms of education and credentialing and getting them up to skill in curriculums. I can work with people who are involved in supervision who might have to supervise coaches who use AI. And those people are certainly not ready to supervise yet. And lastly, the governance and compliance thing. How do we ensure that the right infrastructure is in place to support coaches to really help their clients and get them to fulfill their potential? There's a lot of areas to cover, but my career right now in the near future is not about working in any one of those silos. AI requires a thinking which is transdisciplinary, and it means I have to be transdisciplinary in my career. And I can't just be a coach. I have to be a trainer. I have to be involved in supervision. I have to be involved in research. I have to be involved in governance and compliance. I have to be involved in all of those things. But then that appeals to the Leonardo character in me, that Renaissance character, because I get to use all of me rather than parts of me. And that's probably the most fulfilling career that you can have, where all of you is being used rather than just bits of you. And that's kind of where I am at the moment. So that's a kind of 40-odd minute sort of version of my life story. But hopefully within there you can see not just what I've ended up becoming, but hopefully what I've helped make a difference within the world.
Fascinating. Thanks for sharing. How has the response of coaches been, Jess?
It's been mixed. First of all, there's concern because I've attended some events and people have listened to people giving them guidance and information, yet still coaches ask, where do I begin? Where do I start? And then there are people who've been working with it for a while, have been practicing and using it, and they're familiar with it, so they're not so scared. They understand its significance and they understand how it will affect them. And then there are people who are researchers who probably have a wider sense of what's going on than people who are just experimenting with it, for example. And someone like me, who's for many, many years worked as someone who was a futurist, where I used foresight skills to look at what was the future for a particular industry or a technology, especially by conversing with a lot of experts and looking at industry trends. For someone like me, the way that I look at things can be a bit formidable and scary because I'm looking 5, 10, 30 years into the future, and I'm not just looking at what's going on in the moment. And I understand, though, for professional purposes, that some of the coaches who are versed at that level, they have fears, but they also have hopes as well. And I think if it's hopes and opportunities that will get realized, it will be because of collaborations and people not being blind to how fast things are moving and being able to match that pace of change. And that's possible. There's a term that's emerged recently, which is AI anxiety, because people feel they're going to get left behind because they don't have what it takes to work with AI. And you don't need to understand how to create AI programs in order to work with AI and take advantage of it. Fortunately, a lot of it now is what they call no code software, where you don't have to write software. You can just use the AI, and get it to do stuff. And the real skills are just learning how to ask it to do things. That's really what they come down to. So most people can ask a question and refine it. So there's hope, and especially coaches. Coaches are really good at asking questions, and they're the most equipped people to use AI. And the most amazing thing that I discovered recently when I was looking at how AI works, like ChatGPT, the algorithms, I looked and I thought, wow, this is just the same process as what coaches use when they're working with clients. So it may very well be that AI relies heavily on people who are coaches in order for it to get better in the future. So if any coaches are worried about AI replacing you, don't, because it's more likely AI is going to hire you for the future to make itself better. All right. So I think I'll leave with that comment that I don't think people have got to be worried about their jobs. If they're not just following standard models and their coach maturity is quite high, they'll end up being someone who AI looks to get better. So that's a thing. But however, if you're someone who's just sticking to standard models and you haven't matured your coaching yet to the point where you can move fluidly between them and maybe even have your own ways of doing things, you might have a bit more concern. And the only thing that's a cure for that is just more experience. The more mature you get, the less you'll have to worry about it. So just carry on with your coaching, carry on with your practice, and the more effective you are in your coaching, the less you'll have to worry about AI ever bothering you, in a negative sense. It'll more likely, as I said, be looking at you as an asset. And that means that you don't have to ever worry about it. You know that it'll always be looking to work with you rather than replace you.
How do you see it impacting the client or the coachee?
Well, people who are coachees now they now have a choice, especially this whole democratization of coaching aspect of what's going on, which means that you can get coaching for free, effectively. You can go and ChatGPT.
That doesn't sound good, Jez.
No, at first it doesn't look like it does, because one of the consequences of doing that is, how do you ensure that client is in a situation where they are psychologically safe? There are a whole host of risks for coachees just going out there and just using the AI by themselves. People have started using AIs for therapy. The most used avatar on a certain platform is a psychologist avatar, and it's used by several million people to get psychotherapy advice. But then there have been other systems which have misconstrued what a person is talking about and has actually led those people to commit suicide. So there are risks and there are opportunities. And the big challenge is for coaches to ensure that for coachees that are using AI, to ensure that they're guided in mitigating the risks and minimizing them, while also at the same time maximizing what they can get from them in terms of opportunities to learn or to develop or enhance their awareness, those kind of things. And I've suggested to coaches and to coachees that they respect four different ways of working with AI. The first is that they just use it for information. The second is that they use that information in a coaching session for guiding how the coaching session goes, but it's done under the supervision or guidance, I should say, of the coach. But then the next stage is the AI is something that the coachee can use, but the coach supervises the coachee on how to use the AI. That's a supervised way of using it. And then once they're familiar with the AI and they're familiar with the risks and they know how to work with it in psychological safety, then the coach might allow the coachee to use the AI in an unsupervised way. But if there's any problems, the AI needs to be rigorous enough in its risk management that if conversations start veering off into, say, territories of suicide or criminal activity, then the AI needs to generate notifications to the coach that this is going on, because that's required in ethical compliance. And then the coach needs to come in and step in and help manage the situation. So providing people follow that process in that sequence, use it for information, use it for guidance, use it in a supervised way, and then finally use it in an unsupervised way, then they're probably going to minimize the risks and they're going to maximize the opportunities for how AI can be partnered with.
And who would be ensuring this or monitoring this process, in your opinion?
Well, that's one of the things to do with compliance and governance. But in order for compliance and governance to be of value, you can't just immediately start slapping ethics guidelines on things. You've got to at least walk the landscape a little before you build roads on it, let alone create laws for it. Because you can create paths through things, you can create laws to control stuff, but there may be things that you've not yet encountered which will just blow all that to pieces. And you'll have no control over those environmental forces that you failed to map and failed to survey first, before you started slapping ethics guidelines on it and legal laws on top of it. So the first call to action would be just take a walk, go walk about in the landscape, in the terrain. Try stuff out like ChatGPT, try using Alexa or Siri properly, and seeing what it's really capable of. There's a platform called Relevance AI. Okay. And that's an example of something that's taking things beyond just communication and exchange. And it's giving opportunities for organizations, businesses to take what's being exchanged and communicated through language and turn it into actions, like send an email, make a phone call, send someone, a payment, those kind of things. So the movement now into action-based AI is already starting to happen. There's already platforms out there which will allow you to tie in the conversation into you getting actions carried out for you on behalf of you by the AI. It's risky because you're beginning to give agency to the AI beyond it just playing your favorite bit of music or turning the lights down. So be wary of those things. As long as the process of what agency is being given to the AI is clear, in other words, the AI is explainable AI, and the workflow to go from having a conversation to getting something done is very clear, then you can probably do that, and your organization might massively benefit in terms of its efficiency and effectiveness. But of course, it's going to have a knock-on effect on your employees, because if stuff starts to get automated that human beings used to do, then those human beings, two things are going to happen to them. Either they're going to lose their jobs, or they'll have to reskill and learn to do things differently. So don't be too worried about losing your job if you're capable of reskilling in that situation. And I'm seeing a lot of tech companies, the smart ones are reskilling. They're learning how to work with the enemy. It's that old adage of, keep your friends close, but your enemies closer. And I think that applies to AI. It's the thing you need to keep closer. And it'll ensure that you're always in collaboration with it. You're always in partnership with it. And typically collaborators don't tend to get shot. Right? At least by the enemy, the new enemy, whatever it is, if you think of it as an enemy. And certainly if you're in partnership with someone, you are less exposed to risk than if you were trying to do things on your own. And as I said, don't think about partnership with AI and collaboration, but more importantly, think about collaborating and partnering with other human beings, because collectively your creativity, your consciousness, your empathy, or the intelligence that you have is far higher fidelity and quality and usefulness than the AIs. And I did say to coaches, you got in the near future, 3 things are going to happen. You're going to see AIs help people with small transitions, like in psychotherapy or those kind of things, or even aggregates of transitions where people go through transformations. But what they won't be able to do is necessarily see people transcend their circumstances. So AI will be really good at helping people with the lower rungs of coaching, helping people with transitions and transformations, but the higher stuff, which is people helping people to transcend who they're being, or organizations and who they are, that will really only be something that human beings can do, because the AIs cannot transcend themselves.
Absolutely.
Only human beings can do that. So it may force all coaches ultimately to just focus on helping human beings transcend, helping humanity to transcend. And I'm thinking, well, if AI leads to coaches being forced to deal with the highest common denominators of human problems rather than the lowest ones, then it can only be of benefit to humanity in that situation, right?
Absolutely. Well said, Jess. Well said. How do you suggest getting other cultures involved? You mentioned
Well,
earlier. Yeah.
yeah. So I think it's the 2 things that really contribute to AI being used and generating particular outcomes are its data, its databases, and also its algorithms, its models. Those 2 things, the data sets and the models, define how the AI will interact with you. And if all the data sets are very much taken from Western English language sources, and they use language models which are based on English language, then clearly there's going to be a bias in terms of how they're going to work. And you're going to find people from other cultures who speak a different language and have got a different block of data that they're working with. They won't necessarily resonate with ChatGPT's, outputs. And that's exactly what's been going on. There's been data that clearly indicate that ChatGPT has a big distance between its outputs and what would be more acceptable from another culture, for example. So if you want to change it, then you have to change it through those 2 routes. You have to change the data sets that are being fed into the AIs, and you also have to change the models. Somebody said the other day, why don't we use? I was on this call where we were talking about hallucinations. I didn't mention that much today, but when AIs start making up stuff that's not real and not true, and we believe it to be real, and it thinks it's real, like people call that a hallucination. Like when they misquote the actual year someone was born, or misquote a scientific fact, or things like that. But one of the outcomes of that was somebody who's Greek asked, if you're using a language, why are you using English? Greek is far more precise, and it's got far more flexibility in terms of, how it can precisely put things into various kinds of interpretations. Why didn't you use Greek to define the language models rather than English? And the person who was talking said, yeah, I can see how that would happen. But the problem is that you have to have a trade-off between the diversity of ways in which you can express things in terms of creative ways of doing things versus logical, rational, strict, precise ways of doing things. And most people are not necessarily interested in precise ways of doing things. That's not what they're interested in using AI for. They want to use it for creative purposes. Therefore, it turns out English language is better than, Greek. Well, I'd argue then, well, actually, I think Arabic's better. Anybody who's listened, read Rumi will see the kind of beauty with which that language is communicated, especially when it comes to things like emotion and human relationships and things like that. So maybe there's a lesson there, which is that for certain kinds of applications, maybe English is the best language. But for other kinds of applications, let's say you want to write romantic poetry, you could say, Shakespeare was pretty good. Or you could say, well, actually, no, I think Rumi did a pretty good job. And these other cultures, Chinese, Indian cultures, they do amazing when it comes to writing romantic poetry. Why don't we use language models based on those languages? So I think the future will be one where, for AI to become properly intercultural and for it to be properly decolonialized, you need to have a mixture of language models. And you need to look at what the problem was or prompt was that was being asked. And according to that, choose an appropriate language model. And it might be not a single language model. You might start with a bit of Arabic, and then you go through English and you end up in Greek for precision and accuracy and so on. But there's still creativity there, and there's still kind of poetry there. And the result is you get something absolutely mind-blowing in front of you. But you have to use these different language models. And of course, behind that, you need to use the appropriate histories of those cultures too, in terms of their data. Now, when you approach AI from that perspective, I look at the future of AI and go, wow, why did I have to be born now? This last few decades, it would have been great to have been born as a millennial or 10 years ago, so that by the time I'm 20, this stuff's just going to be, it's going to really uplift humanity in terms of its consciousness. And that goes back to what I've always been interested in. I've just been interested in how do you, yield the full potential of human consciousness. And you can do it human to human, which is what I did for a long time, especially in martial arts and meditation and mindfulness. But you can also have technology as an adjunct and partner with it. And if you do it right, you'll elevate your consciousness to a higher level, and you'll make the world a better place. You'll empower people as opposed to disempower them. And you'll make people resourceful, and you'll make them able to function not just independently, but they'll learn how to function interdependently. They learn how to help one another. That's what's possible. So I'm looking forward to that. I'm in my 50s, but I've got at least a good few years yet to enjoy how all of this is going to unfold in the next 5 or 10 years. And the futurist in me kind of knows what's going to happen. When I made those forecasts back for the European Union about 2015, about what was going to happen in the next 5, 10, 30 years in the creative industries, I was doing some futurist work on that. It's amazing that within 5 or 10 years later, all the forecasts I made have come true using the algorithms I put together. So using the same kind of thinking, I'm looking into the future and seeing what's going to unfold. And I think there's more opportunities than risks, especially if we collaborate with each other and we partner with AI in the process.
Jess, you have shared so many invaluable insights. There's so much. It's a wealth of knowledge in, all that you have said from the beginning till now, sharing your career journey. It's absolutely intriguing. And I just want to ask you one question. I know you already own and you will continue to own, but what is your definition of owning your career?
Well, if I tune in to my career and look at what it is that I feel is a part of me, then I can, with some confidence say that is what I own. And I would say that having a mindset that is curious has been really important to me. Curiosity owns me. Curiosity absolutely owns me.
That's evident, very evident.
But more importantly, I think the extension of that is cultivating curiosity in others that enables them to break down delusions into their component illusions so that they're just left with the truth. And I do that through technology. I do that through education. I do that through working with people at a personal level. But that curiosity, when you work with it in an open way, but you also work with it in a strategic way, it can really enlighten you. and it can also spread in a pay it forward kind of way. It enlightens others, and it can lead them to enlighten others. And it very much links to what I think owns me, which is a kind of a place I want to be is what owns me. And the place I want to be is something that relates to something a few people, somebody asked me a few years ago. They asked, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I had two answers for that. When I was younger, I said, I don't want to ever be grown up because I want to always be growing. And that's when I was 16 years old. Now, a much older age, I came up with a kind of different interpretation of what I wanted to do when I grew up, what was going to own me, what was going to own my growth, my career. And I'd always had this ambition of being a billionaire because I could help a lot of people if I had a lot of money. But then I realized, actually, what you need are resources, not necessarily money. And I said to someone once, I want to be a billionaire. And they laughed. And I said, but I don't want to be a billionaire with money. I said, I want to be a billionaire in terms of the number of people I've helped. And I don't mean number of people I help one-on-one. I'm talking about the number of people I've enabled to help one another without me even being there. And one of the primary ways I thought I could do that, because in my life I've nearly been killed about 6 or 7 times through gun situations, knife situations, car accidents, surgery, all sorts of things. And I knew if I was really going to help people to help one another, how could that happen if I wasn't around?
Yeah.
And you realize that if you want something like that to happen, and it's got to work without you being there, your ego can't be part of the equation.
Yeah.
So I realized I need to build something that will work even when I'm not there. And that's
your
why,
legacy.
That platform I've created back in 2008 and that I'm still using and helping people with. If I disappear off the face of the earth tomorrow, and that was something that was on the cards in the last year or two, because in 2020 I was diagnosed with cancer, and as if I hadn't been close to death enough times in my life, then I get cancer, right? And I've had 2 operations.
One thing is for sure, Jess, you are extremely resilient.
I think I love
That's
life,
for sure.
and life obviously loves me enough to keep me around and not take me off the planet quite yet. But it led me to build that platform because I thought I can't leave my knowledge and experience and my lessons and the way I help people to help one another just in my brain. It needs to exist independently of me, and it has to be as close as possible to the way I would do things. So I converted myself into an AI basically in 2008, and it just means that if I was to leave the planet tomorrow, there's a tool that people have been using for the last 10 years, and people will continue to be able to use it, and it'll be able to be used without me having to be there in that unsupervised kind of fashion, that higher level of how AI should be used in coaching, right?
Yes.
So they've already been trained, they've already been onboarded, all those people. They know the risks and the opportunities associated with it, and they all work together in groups. So it means that I know that if I were to disappear tomorrow, there are a group of people who know how to cultivate one another's potential, and they can use my AI avatar on this platform, and they can continue to help one another through that. So I can relax a little because I know that I can spend all my time stocking up on new ways of learning about things and helping people, refining AI and helping make sure that people who use it are minimizing their risks and maximizing their opportunities. But more importantly, more than anything else, they are elevating humanity together in that collaborative, partnered way. That if I've got a dream, if there's something that owns me, it's that. And my TEDx talk began with that process where I was talking about ideas that we think we have for the world, but actually, it's not that though we have those ideas. It's actually that those ideas have us, and there's an idea that owns me, that owns my career. And it's this idea of helping people help one another without me being there. And that's what owns me right now. That's what my life's about. And as long as I keep feeding and sustaining that, I'm being true to myself. And that's all I can ask of myself, really, just to be true to myself.
Kudos to you. Elevating elevating humanity by empowering people to empower one another,
Yeah.
even when you're not physically present. Beautiful. Beautiful. I am completely intrigued. Viewers, I'm sure you are as well. And whoever is going to watch the recording subsequently, I am sure they will be intrigued. Jess, before we close, is there anything you wish to share or tell our viewers?
Yeah, people do often ask, if there was one thing you were going to say to people, what would it be? And what would be the last thing you would say, before you shuffle off your mortal coil? And I was thinking about what is unnecessary in our lives. And it's interesting that when you do everything you can to remove what's unnecessary in your life, then you're left with what is necessary for you to work with. And that's not a complicated formula. I know it can be hard to try and find out what is the stuff that's unnecessary in your life. But you know what? There's a lot of coaches out there who can probably help you.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. So just, be discerning, eliminate the unnecessary, and you'll be left with only what's necessary and focus on that.
Yeah.
Excellent. Perfect. Jess, thank you so much for making time and sharing your insights with us. It's been absolutely intriguing. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mira, for the space. And it's very affirming for me to once in a while just say, by the way, this is what you've been doing in this life. And it's something that I can at least have not necessarily pride in, but it's something I can look at and have some respect for, at least. And you've given me the opportunity to experience that, so I'm really grateful.
Your response has inspired me or has reminded me of something I did not ask you, a very important question. You have talked about your career journey from the beginning till now. How does it make you feel talking about your journey?
It's literally what I just said. I'm like many human beings. I often question my self-worth and my value, and trying to gauge my self-esteem and wonder whether I should be humble or whether I should be noble. And it's an eternal kind of challenge for me. And I was speaking to my partner the other day, and I said, I've not had a job, paid salary job, for the best part of a year because I left the university I was working at. But I've got resources, I've got money, I've got someone who loves me, I've got people who find value in things that I'm sharing, and I'm finding things that I love, receiving as well in terms of what other people are sharing back with me. And the feeling it leaves me with is to look at that life and feel it's been worthy, to feel it's been one that is full of life. It's something that I feel I've accumulated vitality in, even with my cancer and even with the other situations where I've nearly been killed in my life. I'm still alive, And I remember a few years ago when I first started coaching, someone asked me what my motto was, because I just come out of a situation where I'd been made homeless. This is back in 2008, actually, when I put together my AI platform. At the beginning of 2008, February 23rd, 2008, I became homeless.
That
And I
must
was
have been
sleeping.
tough.
It was freezing cold, and I was sleeping outside behind some garbage cans of a North London theatre. And I genuinely didn't know, because it was so freezing, I didn't know if I was going to wake up in the morning. And I'm not religious, but I said to God at the time, I prayed, and I said, don't let me die here without the gift in me having made a difference in the world. Lucky, I did wake up in the morning. But while I was sleeping, I remember waking up on occasion and looking around and noticing that I'd lost a lot of things in my life. But in that situation, I was still left with the truth about who I was and what person I was. And for me, I look back at things that led me into that situation. And I realized that from a place of compassion, the things that you can be told that are the truth can be delivered in two ways for you. Someone can tell you the truth, but tell you the truth in a harsh way. You might want to slash your wrist or beat yourself up over it because it's not a truth that you're comfortable with, you know? Or they can share the truth with you in a way that makes you want to do something about it, you know? Exercise some agency. And in my case, the truth that gives me life is the only thing that's necessary. And I'm lucky in my life that the majority of my life has been spent on working with the truth that gives me more life. You know, and that fits for the Tibetans. That's how they see compassion as being the most powerful force in the universe rather than gravity. Because with compassion, you're able to work with the truth in a way that gives you more life. And if it gives you more life, it gives you more agency. It gives you more agency, it gives you more freedom. It gives you more freedom, it gives you more opportunities, and so on. And that, in a circular, virtuous way, it makes you feel more alive. And you get more access to more of the truth. And I love that circle. And I'm lucky that I feel that I've never broken out of that circle. I'm always working with the truth in a way which gives me more life. And I'm helping other people to do it too. And so long as I'm in that circle, I can only feel alive. I can only feel worthwhile. I can only feel this is my time in history, you know? And if I can help other people to do that too, then I've done right by the gift that God gave me. You know, I did it justice.
You know, Jess, I have no doubt, absolutely no doubt, that you're making a huge positive difference in the world. And I have no doubt that you will continue to make a huge positive difference in the world. I admire you for that. I congratulate you for that. And thank you. Thank you for your contribution. Thank you for your service.
Thank you, Mira. Thanks to everybody for listening.
And thanks again for making time for this session, viewers. Till we meet again,